Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. It's December 2020, and it's been a big week. So, we're doing this special NCIA Today episode to follow up from last week when the MORE Act passed in the US House of Representatives. So, we thought this would be a great opportunity to check in with our Director of Government Relations based in Washington, D.C., Michael Correia. Hi, Mike. How's it going?
Hey, Bethany, how are you doing?
Doing great. It's a little snowy here in Denver today. How is it going in DC?
So, if you were to look out the window over my shoulder, it's perfectly sunny and about 60 degrees, which has never happened because normally it's freezy. So, I'm sure you're jealous out there.
A little bit, but there's more winter to come, so you'll get your snow.
I actually hope. I'm looking forward to snow. I want to take my daughters out.
Oh, that sounds great. So let's dive right in. Some history was made recently in Congress. Let's tell our listeners what happened.
Yeah, so it was an exciting time. The MORE Act, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, passed last week, last Friday. It was truly a historic day. It was basically the first time in history a chamber of Congress passed a marijuana legalization bill. And so it was definitely a stressful time, a busy time for me last week, but just for the advocates and for all the people that were fighting for this bill, it goes to show you how far Congress has come over these years. The fact that we actually had a legalization bill passed, so it's truly historic.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was an amendment to the MORE Act that was offered at the last minute. I wonder if you can talk about that.
Yeah, so when the MORE Act was introduced, which was the summer of 2019, and not to get too inside the Beltway, but the bill was referred to 8 committees of jurisdiction. And the way it works in Congress is every committee has jurisdiction and can do whatever they want with that bill and the provisions of that bill. So, like the Ways and Means Committee deals with taxes, the Energy and Commerce Committee would deal with regulations, the Judiciary Committee would deal with the Controlled Substances Act and the criminal aspects of the war on drugs. And so every committee has jurisdiction over it, or 8 committees had jurisdiction over it. The Judiciary was the lead one. They had marked up the bill at the committee. And so we always knew that these other committees would want to talk about the bill. And in January, I hate to say it's been almost a year, the Energy and Commerce Committee held a hearing on the MORE Act, and they talked about this. And they said they wanted to be more involved in the issue. They wanted to talk about regulations, and they wanted to have more hearings on the issue. And then COVID hit, and so that sort of delayed everything on the trajectory of what Energy and Commerce was going to be doing. And as the bill was getting close to the House floor, the Ways and Means Committee had always talked about adding a provision related to taxes. And they were using as a guide an older bill, S420, which is the Marijuana Revenue and Regulate Act. And so they took some of the tax provisions out of that bill, and they offered an amendment that there were provisions related to taxes, there were provisions related to federal permitting and bonding, other provisions related to criminal justice and felony convictions and other things. So it was a pretty big amendment. I think it was about a 30-page amendment. It was not a perfect amendment, and nothing ever is perfect in DC when they're making a sausage. And so there were some concerns on some of these provisions that NCIA and some of the cannabis industry had, but we were not going to get in the way of stopping something that was historic, but more along the lines of working behind the scenes to make sure that improvements could be made.
Right. So you're mentioning the provisions of the amendment that brought up concerns, and what was the response from the congressional offices about that?
So thanks for asking that. And so if people watch the debate, and if you go to maybe C-SPAN online or Congress.gov, I'm sure there's debate somewhere online where you could see it. One of our champions, the Cannabis Caucus co-chair Barbara Lee from California, actually read a statement into the record from the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Richie Neal, that basically said, hey, this amendment's not perfect. We know it's not perfect. There's some provisions we're going to be working on in the future. And we're going to be sitting down with the cannabis industry and other groups to make sure these concerns are addressed. So we were very comfortable knowing that going forward into next year, we'll be having these discussions with the relevant committees.
Right. Well, we know it passed, but I wonder if there were any surprises on the vote outcome itself.
So for the most part, it was a party line vote. My deputy, Michelle Rutter-Freeberg, and I had a little bet, and we were guessing between 222 votes and 230, and it was 228. So it was along the lines, but I don't know if it was because of COVID or because of retirements and into Congress, but there were about 45 members that didn't vote. So that really threw the numbers off. It could have been probably a lot higher, or it could have been a lot closer. It just depends. It was strictly almost partisan along party lines. I think there were 5 Republicans that crossed over and supported it. And there were probably, I think, 6 Democrats that still were opposed to it, either for means like they actually don't support cannabis reform, or the fact that they didn't think a cannabis legalization bill should be coming up before Congress addressed some of the COVID emergency funding issues. But for the most part, it was along a party line vote.
Gotcha. Well, Congress is adjourning very soon, if not today. What does this mean for the cannabis bills in general, like safe banking and the MORE Act?
Yeah, so I'm old enough to remember when Congress used to get out around October or November. Now they play this game of chicken until they wait until around Christmas time or until around New Year's. You all know that the government's supposed to run out of money today, actually. December 11th, they run out of money today. So Congress is desperately trying to fund the government, at least for another week, so no one gets furloughed, no one loses their job, and nothing bad happens. And then they can come back next week and fight over some of the issues. But as you know, when a Congress ends, that's it for legislation. And so nothing happens. Then in January, we start in with a new Congress, and we start from scratch. And so we had to reintroduce all these bills again. And so the Safe Banking Act has passed 3 times out of the House. It's sitting in the Senate. Nothing has changed over the past 6 months to a year. We're still hoping that if these guys can agree on some type of emergency funding bill, the safe banking language will be in there. But being realistic, it's getting towards Christmas. I just do not see something like that happening, but I haven't completely given up hope. Reading the tea leaves, the Senate was never expected to move on the MORE Act or take up the MORE Act. It was one of these things. It was a good message bill. It was the House Democrats letting America know and letting activists know where they're thinking on cannabis reform. And so it was important, but we always knew it's the end of Congress. It's December. It's going to be ending soon. And let's come back in January and have some of these discussions going forward.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot to look forward to in January. And there's also going to be a special election in Georgia for 2 Senate seats. Wow. So how does the outcome of that affect our strategy going into next year?
Yeah, it is. It is the weirdest thing where Georgia does this jungle primary where if no one gets 50%, they go and do a special election. And, special elections in early January, no one's going to vote. No one's going to know about it. But guess what? The entire direction of the U.S. Senate and our government is dependent on these 2 seats. And so the Republicans have the majority now. Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky leads everything. And if he does not want something happening, it's not going to happen. If the Democrats win these 2 seats, the majority would be 50-50. And our future vice president, Kamala Harris, would be the deciding vote. And so on something like that, if there were close votes, something good for a Democrat could happen. But what's going to be contentious and really important is committee chairs on a 50-50 majority. What does that mean for committees of jurisdiction and who's going to be the chairman? And so I'll give you a perfect example. Ron Wyden from Oregon is a big friend of the cannabis industry and the cannabis cause. if they were in the majority, he would be the chair of the tax writing committee. That would be wonderful for cannabis activists. The Judiciary Committee is led by Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham. These guys are bad on the cannabis issue. There are other committees of jurisdiction. That the Banking Committee is led by Michael Crapo from Idaho, who's been, for the most part, bad on this issue. And so it would really change the outcome of behind the scenes of how the discussion on cannabis could evolve. Because if Democrats were in charge, we could probably have hearings. We could probably have a more vibrant discussion on this issue, and cannabis legislation may work its way through. We saw going from 2017 and 2018 to 2019, 2020, when the Democrats took over the House, you saw a difference. You saw a lot more hearings, and you saw bills actually passing. The Safe Banking Act passed, the MORE Act passed, and you see that discussion changing. So will cannabis be legalized if they win these 2 seats in Georgia? Probably not. But I do know the discussion on cannabis would change if the Senate is controlled by Democrats led by Chuck Schumer versus Republicans led by Mitch McConnell. It's just one of the dynamics we're thinking about. And I'm going to be really excited. I'm definitely watching this election because it could change the outcome of my job for the next 2 years.
It's amazing how just a handful of Senate seats can make such a big difference. And let's discuss how a future Biden administration fits into all of this as well.
Yeah, so I mean, everyone who knows anything about cannabis and Biden knows personally the guy's not been the greatest on the issue. He's 70 something years old. He's probably not that evolved on our issue. But with that being said, the person he picked for vice president is a co-sponsor of the MORE Act. That should say something. The second is, regardless of what my views and everyone's views of Joe Biden, the person is, it's Joe Biden, the president, who's going to be appointing thousands of people in administrative positions. And who's he going to pick for secretaries and cabinet positions? And so a perfect example would be, who's his Secretary of Treasury? The Treasury could affect banking regulations and banking rules. Who is he gonna pick for HHS? That could have ramifications on FDA and research. Who's he going to pick for the VA? That could have ramifications on VA doctors and how VA patients could get access to cannabis. Who is he going to appoint to head the DEA and ONDCP and other organizations that deal with drug reform? And let's not forget, the most important one is Department of Justice. Who's going to be the Attorney General? Would they rewrite the Cole memo? Would they give us stronger language in the Cole memo? So, all I know is, regardless of what people think of Joe Biden personally on his views on cannabis, I guarantee you a Joe Biden administration will be a lot friendlier to the cannabis reform movement than some of these zealots who are filled up the Trump administration. It's just something they believe or don't believe in. There are a lot of things people can do administratively behind the scenes that could make the cannabis industry sort of grow and reach its potential a lot faster.
That's fair. Earlier, you mentioned reading the tea leaves, or as I like to say, looking into our crystal ball. With everything that you've just mentioned, what should the cannabis industry expect to happen in this next Congress over the next 2 years?
So, let's flip a coin. Let's see what's heads or tails, and let's see where it goes. But, we'll see. Let's watch the Senate stuff in early January and see where that goes. That's important. And we saw what happened with the MORE Act. So the key is, you saw the election. This was not like a blue tidal wave. Some Democrats lost in the House. And so the margin is going to be a lot smaller for the Democratic majority. And this could have been a wake-up call to some of these moderates as far as the messaging from a lot of the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. And how does that affect cannabis reform? And what should our strategy be? So that's one of the dynamics I have to manage going into January, February, March, of what does that mean for cannabis reform? Does that point to more power to the States Act? Does that point to a new and improved MORE Act 2.0? Does that mean safe banking is the only thing that's going to happen? Are we going to have more hearings? What's going to happen? And so my job is basically navigating and managing the reality of Congress and the makeup of Congress, and what can we realistically expect to pass both chambers of Congress and then get passed into law. And that's something I manage. There's the dream world, the Michael Correia dream world of what I want on cannabis reform. And then there's what House Democrats and Senate Republicans and a future Biden, I cross my fingers when I say future Biden administration, do on cannabis reform. So a lot up in the air, but that's something in January, February, Michelle and I and other cannabis industry activists and industry people and advocates are going to be sitting down and talking about our strategy going forward and what's the best direction to achieve a good outcome.
We all share the same dream, Mike. We're all in your dream.
Yeah, I hear you.
Well, the next couple months and beyond are going to be super interesting. So thanks for keeping us informed. Hopefully we can have a safer world soon. And I really look forward to coming back to DC for my favorite NCIA event, Lobby Days.
Yeah,
It
I
is
know. It's one of
truly
the
good.
saddest things is just being locked up and shut down and the public not going to the Capitol and try being a lobbyist where you can't lobby the traditional way and going to events and doing this. So I miss that. I'm hoping things get better in the springtime. I hope things are definitely better in the summertime and we can pull off our lobby days. So appreciate what you all are doing out in DC, and anytime you need a chat, just reach out.
Thanks so much, Mike. I appreciate the update. And thanks everyone else for tuning in to this special update with our DC Government Relations team, Michael Correia, Director of Government Relations. Have a great weekend.
Go bake some cookies.